Hello, my name is Ian Watson, and I am a Director Emeritus of the American Membrane Technology Association, or AMTA. The interview you're about to see is the 22nd in a series of what we call Chats with the Pioneers. AMTA is a technical association that's founded on the advocacy of membrane technology for use in a variety of water treatment applications, from wastewater reuse and reclamation to seawater desalination. The heart of this technology is the membrane itself. About 2.5 years ago, or maybe 3 years ago now, our board of directors decided that it would be a significant project to try and record some of the history of this technology in the form of these chats with the pioneers. AMTA is making segments of these interviews available on its website so that you, the participants, can view them, and also they're available to the young engineers and technologists so they can understand the work that went into the development of this technology, which has assisted in water treatment and clean water supplies throughout the world. With me today, I have 4 gentlemen who started their careers, or in some cases made part of their career, at the North Star Research Institute in Minneapolis, Minnesota. To my right is Lee Rozelle, Craig Broden, Ken Cobian, and Don Streeter. And Lee, I'd like to start with you. If you would, could you give us a brief introduction of yourself, your background, where you worked before North Star and what you did since?
Well, thank you very much. I'm Lee Rozelle. I have a PhD in chemistry from University of Wisconsin, and my first job was with DuPont. I became a microscopist at DuPont, even though I was in physical chemistry at the University of Wisconsin and in chemical kinetics. But the microscopy was extremely interesting. I studied mylar film and found lots of little things about the surface of mylar film. My next job was with Honeywell, and from Honeywell, actually at Honeywell, we one of the projects I had, I analyzed the spectrum, infrared spectrum of human urine, and we related that to patients who were undergoing open heart surgery, and those that passed, the urea went down to 0, and the surgeon at that time wanted to try to build an instrument that could measure urea in urine. Now, not that urea wasn't known to be in urine, but we could measure it by infrared spectrum. I was recruited from, I was a principal scientist there, and I was recruited from Honeywell by North Star. I was replacing Pete Francis, who was my predecessor at North Star. And I was director of chemistry, and our major projects were in membranes. I was director of chemistry, and then later director of the chemistry division, along with Roy Larson and Gene Erickson. Well, at North Star, I was at North Star from 1966 to 1974, and it was a great experience. I found the people at North Star extremely fine, and most of our projects were with Office of Saline Water. We worked for Hal Padal at OSW, and he had someone who was another Chanapasapa, who happened to be somewhat in competition with Hal. So we had our problems occasionally with Chana. He did give us a contract at one time, and he gave us some pretty wild objectives, but we made them, and we made them before the contract was over, and then he dropped the contract. So we did our job, and we did it better than he thought he would do it. But we stuck pretty much with Hal Padal, and he was also, I believe, with Bureau Rec after OSW. After North Star, I went to USCI. I was vice president of research and development, and USCI is U.S. Catheter. It's a division of C.R. Bard. And there we were involved in vascular prostheses and heart catheters and that sort of thing. And we developed heart catheters, and I used to go down and see DeBakey in Houston a couple of times a year with that job. It was quite interesting, and was in surgery many times with several surgeons using the products that we made. From there, I was with Permuted Company for a while and ran the lab in Princeton, New Jersey, where Permuted's operations were in management operations were in New Jersey, northern New Jersey, and we were down in southern New Jersey, so to speak. That was a very good job. It was owned by Zurn, and Zurn Industries didn't really like R&D, and decided that they wanted to close off the R&D at Permuted. From there, I went for a short time, actually, to Carnegie Mellon Research Institute, and became head of the engineering division, and then they closed it out, and so I was on the job market again. I was at Gilman Sciences for a short time, and Gilman Science, I was vice president of R&D at Gilman. That was a job I was not happy with, and I loved Ann Arbor, but Chuck Gilman was a tough, difficult man to work for. And I left, had an opportunity to go with Culligan, and was vice president of science and technology at Culligan International. And so my duties there were policy. I didn't have anybody working for me at that time, and I was kind of a freelancer with Culligan, with policy and looking at new products, basically new products, and coordinating our work in Europe as well as here. So we had plants in Bologna, we had an operation near Paris, one in Belgium, and I was involved with consultants in Italy and traveled quite a bit in these areas. It was not a real scientifically oriented company. And although I tried to get film tech membranes in there for water softening, because I thought that would be a great project for them and a great product, they weren't too happy about film tech, because they did film tech. They did a few favors for film tech, I guess, in the beginning, and felt they needed the favors back, and they wanted something for nothing. Well, film tech wasn't going to do that, and I agreed with film tech. It was difficult. So they never did do the membranes for water softening, unfortunately. And so from Culligan, I was in Connecticut and was involved in water there. Now, actually, from between Culligan and the job in Connecticut, I sat on the National Drinking Water Advisory Council, and so I was really pretty much involved in drinking water. Pretty much for the rest of my career in some manner or form. And I was at Olin Corporation in Connecticut. And unfortunately, I couldn't work in water for a while because Culligan made them sign an agreement that I would not work in water and do anything that might be competitive with them. Kind of unfortunate, but I was involved in swimming pool chemicals and that sort of thing at Olin. So that's kind of, I've retired, so that's kind of my career, just about. I'm trying to think, there may be some other things in there, but
well, you can always come back. Yeah. Craig, how about you?
I'm nowhere near as round. I mean, did you work for everybody except 3M and General Mills?
just about.
I'm Craig Broden, and I go back. I started with North Star Research in October of 1972. I cleaned glassware for the now infamous John Cadotte. And I worked with Ken Cobian, who was our tube man. No one could cast better membranes than him other than Bob Peterson and John Cadotte. I cleaned glassware. I did a little bit of everything. I did maintenance work. I did everything. I wrote proposals. I worked on proposals. I did all kinds of stuff. And I started getting in membranes a little bit, you know, asking all kinds of questions. So I did that for a while. And I got to be the last employee. Once they formed FilmTech, I mean, they asked me and, well, Don went, and I didn't. I stayed with Northstar, or MRI at the time, and I got to lock the building. I was the last employee there. I locked the building, and away it went. I then went to work for Sperry Univac at the time, and I worked on designing computer chips for about 4 or 5 years. Was unemployed, came back looking for a job. I called up Tom Stern, who was working at FilmTech at the time, and he said, sure, come on in. So I went in, and I had an interview with Roy, and Roy just called me in and said, okay, what do you do? I said, I don't know, same thing I've always been doing. And I said, well, I can't put you in the back because you'll tell stories about me, so I got to create you a different job so you're not working in the back with the employees. So he goes, well, okay, you're hired, so start in a couple weeks. So I started in a couple weeks. A year and a half later, I filled out my application. So I was working for FilmTech for a long time with no real application. So I worked there. I've been working there since, and I've been all over the map. Stuart McClellan, who's emeritus in AMTA, was my mentor for field work, and I worked with Ian Watson. I've worked with Doug Eisberg. I've worked with everybody, and right now I've done all kinds of plant work. I run the return lab in FilmTech, as well as setting up labs in Shanghai and Tarragona, where we've got some other returns and warranty analysis and some other system work. So after all these years, I'm still here, and I don't know why. I don't have a huge background. I don't have much of anything. It was broadcasting, and I guess I can talk. And I learned the whole thing. I'm the subject matter expert for cleaning and for our products. So hopefully in a couple of years I can ride off into the sunset like Lee did.
I think actually you're the first interviewee we've ever had who went to broadcast school.
That's good. I went to broadcast school, but I have no formal training in this. So everything that I learned from my mentors like Stuart McClellan, Ken Cobian, Terry Smith. There's been a lot of people through this business that have really helped me, and all I did was learn. I had to learn organic chemistry on my own. So it's been a challenge, but it keeps me employed.
Good.
It's been fun.
Ken?
Yes, my name is Ken Cobian, and I started at Medtronic, or excuse me, at Northstar in September of 1971, and I worked through about December of 1975. But my background was that I graduated with a chemistry degree from the University of Wisconsin, River Falls, and I went on to graduate school at UCLA in physical organic chemistry. However, that was the time of the Vietnam War, so I got drafted out of graduate school, and I went in the Marines for a couple of years. And coming to Northstar, I was originally from Wisconsin, so I basically wanted to get back home anyway after the Marines. And Lee Rozelle was gracious enough to offer me a job as a technician, and I started at Northstar and working basically for Wendell King and of course John Cadott and Bob Peterson, all of whom, and Lee Rozelle, all of whom were my mentors and very instrumental in helping me develop my career and my pathway for later. When I left Northstar, I went to Medtronic and I worked there for many years. So, but anyway, but during my time at Northstar, I also went to graduate school at the University of Minnesota in material science engineering, and that again was a very instrumental in propelling my career onward. And what I basically worked on was membranes, casting of membranes, research, characterization of polymers and materials that we use in our membranes. Left North Star and went to Medtronic, where I stayed for 36 years, and I ended up as a manager in the 90s, and also I was a technical fellow there, and was elected to the Bakken Society in 2003 for my achievements and contributions to Medtronic, and worked on pacemakers, pacemaker leads, and insulation materials, polyurethane and silicone, and worked with a lot with supply chain and that sort of thing. So.
Good, thank you. Don, your turn.
My turn. Yeah, my name's Don Streeter. I started, well, I started my educational career at University of Minnesota as an English major, and wasn't, you know, it was taking a long time. My wife suggested I try something that you actually get paid for, so I went to the Hennepin County Technical College here close by. One of my instructors was Al Seneschal, and Al Seneschal worked for North Star for some time before he went over to Hennepin Tech. And so after I got done there, he said, you might want to try North Star. He had lots of great stories about that, and he's actually set up an interview for me with Gene Erickson. And so I think it was January, I think, of 1976, so I missed you guys by a little bit. But so I went over there and lucky enough to get hired with Gene. And I, of course, worked with Craig and Bob Peterson and John Cadott and Roy Larson. It was one of the things, I guess, that I did at North Star. One of the first things I got to do was to work with Ralph Forrester, who I have to actually blame my position on now. But
Yeah, there's a lot of blame to be put.
what I learned going out in the field with Ralph was how to make, you know, weirs out of plywood, and, you know, use sticks and stones to assemble some sort of field apparatus. You know, we were sampling wastewater for the meat industry, slaughterhouses and so on. So it was a shock to me to, you know, first sample these raw waste streams. We would put the sampler probe down and fill up the bottles, and, you know, we'd take the bottles back, you know, eventually to North Star to analyze them. But the first site I was at, I think I pulled up the sampling probe, and there's cow parts are wrapped around it, and the smell was so horrible. I didn't think I was going to make it for another week, but yeah, eventually got used to it a little bit. And so it was fun working there. I really liked working there. And then when the guys went to Form Film Tech a little later, Roy Larson called me, and he said they were looking for someone who wouldn't mind getting their fingers dirty. So I said I probably fit that position. So they hired me there, and I went there and pretty much became the element manufacturing department there. All the materials to make membrane elements we assembled by hand, cut them by hand, and a good day, you know, we could make 12, maybe. They make several thousand a day now at Film Tech. So I guess that's where I got to start at Film Tech, and just worked with all the old guys from North Star, you know, Bob and Roy Larson and Gene Erickson, Ralph for a while, and then Peter Erickson was a big influence on me in the research part when I kind of got to move away from element manufacturing back into research area again, and we worked a lot on membrane testing and evaluation and so on, and improving that. And I guess I'm still doing it. I couldn't find any other jobs after that. So I'm still there. Yeah.
Yeah, that's, we have an old friend, Dave Grunow. I don't know if any of you remember him. He was the guy that started Polymetrics. And he always used to say, it's a good job we have a business to be in, because after we've been in this business, nobody else would hire us.
That's true.
One thing that's always been interesting to me is how the thought process developed that led to development of the thin film composite membrane, which I guess the first one you made at North Star was the NS100.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's one.
NS1?
And then we switched the name.
Oh,
Kept changing
but the
names.
other 99 didn't make it?
Something like that,
Yeah.
no.
So how did you, I mean, did it come to somebody as a flash of brilliance, or did you sit around and say, how can we do this better, or what was the process?
It came to somebody, and that was John Cadotte, who developed that polyethylene amine toluene diisocyanate membrane. And it showed so much resistance to chemicals and that sort of thing, and it also gave us great seawater desalination at fairly good fluxes. And it was really John Cadotte who did this, and then went on to Film Tech.
Now, was that development work done with grants from OSW?
Yes, it was done with OSW, right?
Okay,
Mhm.
good, good. And then you progressed from there to the NS200. Ken, you can...
Yes, I worked on that a little bit. I think after you left, it was based on polyfurfuryl alcohol, and yeah, and that was also cast on the microporous polysulfone, and I did some work on the characterization of that, and as well as the NS100 or NS1, as we said in the early days.
But what happened to the NS200?
The NS.
Yeah, what happened to it?
Oh, I don't know. I don't know what. I think I remember doing SEMS on it, and that was one of the first experiences that I had doing scanning electron microscopy and seeing the surfaces. You know, were all spherical. It was just beautiful. You know, and I went down to control data,
Okay.
and I think Bob. Suggested that I go down there and do SEM analysis, and well, that was fun. There was a lot of fun things at North Star.
What were the differences in characteristics between the 100 and the 200?
Well, they were just completely different chemistries. Well, the NS200 was dark. It was kind of like blackish like, and the NS100, when you put it down, it was kind of still it was transparent, pretty much, and so. And the way you reacted them, I think the furfuryl alcohol was a higher temperature reaction, and the other one was room temperature. You applied the polyethylene amine, from an aqueous solution, right? And I worked on tubes. So what I did was I immersed the tubes, the polysulfone tubes, into a bath that contained, I think, 2% polyethylene amine in aqueous, and then the TDI was in, hexane, and so then I dipped, into the aqueous solution first, and then allowed it to dry a little bit, and then dipped it into the TDI solution, and then that caused the cross-linking.
In terms of its salt rejection, was it a high salt rejection membrane? Or
Yes,
it was?
both the NS200 and 100s were excellent salt rejection. I think where the NS100, at least my challenge with the NS100 and tubular configuration, was trying to get the flux up. The salt rejection was very excellent, and but the flux was needed to be optimized, and that's what I spent a lot of time trying to do.
I don't know, aesthetically, we're all used to nice, clean-looking membranes. I don't know that a black membrane would have been very acceptable to the marketplace.
They'd come out all different colors once.
Yeah.
I mean, he'd do stuff, and all of a sudden, And like I said, he'd go back into his office, and I'm trying to figure out what this whole thing is, right? And whether I'm going to school and I'm not quite understanding what everything is. And he'd go back and he'd be talking to himself, writing and then writing in his book. And all of a sudden he'd come out and he'd go, I'm going to try something else. So then and there he'd go, and he'd go over, and all of a sudden he just left him alone for about an hour or 2 hours. He comes back and he goes, we're going to try something. And then he'd go play, and all of a sudden he goes, I think I might have something. And then he'd go cast it, and then they'd try. He'd get Paulette or whoever, and they'd go and they'd start, all of a sudden they'd start running some flat cells. So there was all kinds of variations, and from day to day, you never knew what he was going to come up with, because he'd just stand there, and you were talking to him, and his eyes would go, he'd be starting to look all over like he had a different idea, and off he'd run. He was a different.
Now at North Star, you were casting flat sheet.
Yeah,
Yep.
basically.
Did you also make spirals? Would you roll spirals
No,
there?
no,
Just
no.
a tubular.
Yeah.
Just tubular.
But everything was, and they did run a lot of stuff on the flat cell.
Yeah.
And that was to try to get the flux up. But I remember all the time, and just like I kept hearing everybody screaming, like from Ralph.
Look at this. We can't. No, the flux is so low. The rejection's great.
And Ralph was a unique, and it's too bad that he's no longer with us, because he would be perfect in an interview like this. It's like Don said, he just created stuff as he went.
Yeah.
And he dabbled in every project that we had.
Now, were you involved in all this goings on, Don?
When more at Film Tech, I was more involved with these sort of goings
You were
on.
busy taking slaughterhouse samples.
Yes, that's right. But I do remember at Film Tech when Ralph began assembling a machine to make membrane.
Yeah.
And, it was plywood and angle iron and rubber bands, and I think duct tape had been invented by then. But, yeah, he would have these contraptions all over and it was like the Rube Goldberg
It was
kind
a
of
Rube Goldberg,
thing, and it actually worked.
Yeah.
It was pretty amazing, and I think when Craig was talking about John Cadotte, one of the things that I remember too was that if I went in at 6 a.m., John would be at the lab bench, and if I left at 8 p.m., John would still be at the lab bench. And I try to fool him and get in early, and he always was there. It's like he never disappeared. So
Even Saturdays.
Except he went and played volleyball at noon. He went and played volleyball at noon. That's why he stayed in such great shape. But he'd hardly ever go home. I mean, he had a lot of kids and everything, but he was always there. And his mind was, he could always just watch the wheels turning. And when he started looking a different direction, then I knew he had a new idea.
Well, he was a cellulosic chemist. I mean, that's where he came from, the paper industry. And so he had a bunch of wild cellulose-type compounds. He had beta-glucan was one of the membranes we had, and a number of, it was interesting.
Did he actually start at North Star making cellulosic membrane?
Yes.
RO membrane?
I believe he did with Pete Francis, my predecessor.
Yeah.
They did the
Because I've
acetate.
never really associated Dr. Cadotte with cellulose acetate.
Yes.
No, but that was
But
his
he came from
main
the paper
membrane.
industry. That's
Yes,
interesting.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was before my time, but I do remember reading reports written by John and others at North Star and Yulee about, I think, the cellulose acetate membranes. So that, and then they
Because
they
that,
launched
of course, was the focus in those days.
Yes.
That's what,
Mhm.
that's what
in the early 70s.
your competition at Rogo was doing that.
But they couldn't get the rejection that we got out of the
No.
NS
No,
100.
that's right.
And
You
that's
didn't have the
what was the big
stability. You
difference.
didn't have the
No,
stability with
it was
cellulose
not
acetate.
it's not as durable.
Well, actually, the original, I think the original cellulose acetate that Reed and Breton developed at the University of Florida had very high rejection,
Right, yeah.
but it had zero flux.
Zero flux. And that was the killer. And that was, I mean, he worked on that forever trying to get the flux to where it is.
Yeah.
But this membrane has always been durable. And the durability is what's always gotten into even the FT30 membrane. It's the durability and the cleanability of it. So, and it all goes back to John Cadotte. I mean, he's the father of this business as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah.
But then I look back at all the, Clint Kopp,
Yes.
Paulette Johnston, Ken Cobian, Mike McGregor. There was,
yes. I forgot about him.
there was a lot of people, Wendell King, there was a lot of people that worked in this in order to get things done right. It was a wild bunch. And Friday afternoons, we tended to leave early and go have fun.
Yeah,
But
true.
still,
But Lee didn't know about it.
Lee didn't know. He didn't know. We left him behind. But it's been a great product, and it's gone all the way through the film tech years.
Yeah,
So,
Now, Lee, you said that when you started dealing with OSW, you dealt mainly with one person whose name,
Yes, Hal Podell.
Hal Bedell.
Yeah.
I don't remember him at OSW,
Oh.
but I certainly remember Dr. Channer.
Yeah, everybody
He was,
remembers. Yeah.
Everybody remembers Dr.
Yeah.
Wasn't
Channer.
there Lyserson or somebody too? Was it Lee Lyserson for a while?
Oh, yeah, there was somebody named Lee, I can't remember, he worked with Hal
Yeah,
occasionally.
okay,
right.
yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
didn't we do some stuff with OWRT too?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, I know we had some contracts with them.
We had contracts with EPA too.
Yeah, EPA, yeah.
Lee mentioned.
Oh, yeah,
Yeah.
we were in municipal waste treatment
Right.
for RO, we were in wash waters from space cabins. I don't know if some of those membranes are used in space or not.
When you started developing this membrane, you got contracts from OSW.
Yes.
Was it difficult to persuade OSW that this was a step forward that because they were all concentrating on cellulose acetate at the time,
Mhm.
and they were giving a lot of money to Roga to develop
Yeah.
cellulose acetate membranes. Was it difficult to persuade them that
No.
you had a better mousetrap?
No.
No?
It was not difficult at all. I remember going up there talking with Hal Podell and talking about our new membrane, and when we talked about the rejection and the flux and the fact that it was, I think the flux was fairly good, wasn't it?
Mhm.
I mean, I thought
Yeah.
it was pretty good.
Yeah.
The rejection was terrific, and
That was good.
it was resistant to chlorine.
Right.
That was pretty exciting to them.
There was a
So-
chlorine-resistant membrane. That's
Yeah.
interesting, because
Yeah.
that's been the
trying to
holy
make
grail
FAL.
ever since. But you actually had one.
Yeah, we did.
One of my assignments was to go down and collect sewage water out of
Oh, okay, yeah,
the treatment plant and test our membranes against that. And the NS1 held up really good. NS100, excuse me, held up really good with all that abuse with the microbiological environment, that we just ran continuously. And I exchanged water, seawater or sewage water, regularly, and kept the bugs going, and it performed very well
We done.
with good flux.
Well, that's really interesting, because it's, one of the drawbacks, if you will, of the thin film composite membrane, the non-cellulosic membrane, was that it had little or no chlorine tolerance.
Right, yeah.
At least the commercial versions of it did.
Mhm.
You had one that was chlorine resistant right from the get-go.
And microbial resistance too.
I'll be darned.
Yep.
That's
Mhm.
interesting.
Then there was the balance of trying to get the flux to where you wanted
Yeah,
to
right.
with everything else. So there's a kind of a trade-off, and a lot of that had to
That's
come.
really interesting.
Yeah.
That's really interesting. Now, you went from that to the North Star 300, the NS 300?
Not that I recall.
I never worked on the
You never worked
300.
on that?
I remember the 300, but
According to the background data we got for these interviews, the NS 300 was the vehicle that John Cadotte took to develop the first FT30 membrane. But it was originally more like an NF membrane, apparently. Is that, you remember that, Don?
Yeah, yeah.
I remember.
That's very
It's,
true. Yep.
It was the basic form that they started to go to FT30
Yeah.
membrane. So it went 300 to 30. But that was pretty much where I believe, John said, we've got something really special here.
Yeah.
We want to go.
Right, it became the
Perfect.
base for what
Yeah.
they tried to move to
Right.
in the
Right.
long run. But there was a lot of experiments done on that before they could ever come up with anything, because it did pass things through, so.
Was that a toluene diisocyanate type membrane?
I think so.
I don't remember, I don't recall that because I
It
wasn't
was
there at the
probably,
time.
it was done after you had
Yeah,
gone, if you were
right.
gone in '74. That was a
Right.
little later. That was a little later.
Right.
Now, did North Star, in its other work outside of membranes, the other research you were doing there, did you ever commercialize anything? Or was it strictly a
No,
research institute?
It was strictly a research institute.
Yeah.
We did river projects, we did all kinds of different projects, even.
Metal finishing effluents,
Yep.
things
Yeah.
like that.
Remember Ralph's invention to burn the striping off the pavement? He had, that was another project that he had, and that didn't work so good. It kind of wrecked some of
Do you remember his anaerobic digester?
Oh, yeah, I remember coming in the day that it blew up. I opened up the back door and I thought the maintenance man was gonna kill him. He chased him down the hallway and said, "Clean that up." He opened up the door and there was raw sewage this deep. You know,
Chicken
blew up.
waste.
Chicken waste, yeah, oh, he'd bring it in. Were you one of the ones that had to bring it in?
No,
We cleared out the whole building, I mean,
Yeah, it was
nobody.
No, it was bad, yeah, so we did a little bit of everything, and even as MRI took over, then it became more project work into, cities and developing, areas and things like that, so
Right.
it was a little bit of everything.
One thing that Ralph developed was membrane flake. You remember flake?
Yes, yes, I
Yeah.
do.
And that, it was flake from the membranes, and it was, I forgot what membrane that was from, do you?
You know, I never actually worked on that project, but I heard,
Oh, it had
Yeah.
carbon black in it. Okay, it was probably a cellulosic with carbon black and had flake. And we had some big contracts with flake,
Really?
yeah.
What was it
Some,
used for?
Well, partly I can't say, because.
You'd have to
it was
kill
a-
me.
It was, yeah.
Yeah.
It was a Navy contract, and it
Uh-huh,
was top secret, actually.
Yeah.
So I don't know whatever happened to it, and I know that it was of interest to, I think, Envirogenics. We had somebody who joined us for about 3 weeks, or a month. I can't remember his name. And he decided to go back to Envirogenics, and he took flake with him. So I didn't know what they did with flake. We didn't, being a government contractor, we didn't have a lot of, we had patents, but patents don't mean a lot.
Right.
So, but flake got us some big contracts.
Every time.
Roy Larson and I were both working on that. And I think it was $500,000 for somebody like North Star. $500,000 contract was big.
Especially in the 70s.
Yeah,
I mean, that was a lot of money.
yeah.
It was a lot of money.
But I don't know whatever happened to it. I have my ideas of where it went and what it could do, but it was top secret and it's never come out.
Ken, you said you were casting tubular membranes.
Yes.
Was this for a specific reason, or was it just something that you were able to do there to?
Well, it was basically develop the membrane into a useful configuration. We did started out with flat cells,
Right.
testing,
Right.
the basic RO test cell, and so we wanted to scale it up into some configuration that might be commercially available, or although we weren't a commercial outfit, but we wanted to demonstrate that it could be made into different configurations, to attract industries and the
what did-
government,
What
so.
sort of material did you use for the tube itself?
For the tube itself, was polysulfone, cast from a 15 or 17, 15% DMF solution, polysulfone, Udel polysulfone, P1700. Boy, it might be Ford. I better not. I can't remember now. But anyway, it was cast out of a 15% solution, and you had to keep it dry. We had a dry room where we did our casting. Basically, what I did was, as John Cadott, taught me to do, was we had a little stainless steel tube, like and it was probably a ½ inch in diameter on the ID. And we filled it up with this polysulfone solution in DMF, and then just allowed it to drain in the dry room and passed a bob through to kind of control the membrane thickness, you know, of the, which was later to become the membrane after the DMAC,
Right.
you know, or the DMF was leached out, and we immersed that into a water bath, you know, and we did different things in that water bath, you know, to try to, you know, adjust the, you know, the microporosity of the film, and you know, so we first of all filled it up, and then dropped the little bob down through, let it drain, and then immersed it in that water bath or aqueous bath, and of various. It might have had sodium chloride in it, might have had something else in, but primarily it was DI water.
And
then
you use different temperatures?
Yes. Well, then that was how we cast the microporous polysulfone. But then you pull that out, and then what we did was in situ cast. You know, the polyethelenamine and the TDI. So you know, was in situ cast on the inside surface of that membrane, on the inner diameter of that tubular,
right.
That ultra thin. You know, I mean, it was an ultra thin. You know, a membrane that was cast on the
Right.
on the inside
Right.
diameter.
Tubular
surface.
membranes became popular, and our OSW people said, do tubular.
Yeah.
And that was their instruction.
Yeah, well, that was, I can remember those days when, you know, people were looking at tubular membranes, and they actually became very popular in the food industry, I think, did they not?
Mm-hmm.
For food, for food processing.
And we did test the tubular configurations at, I remember Webster, South Dakota. We went out there, and went out there with Wendell King, and we, you know, we had some RO lines set up there to treat brackish waters, and so we did that.
Yeah, Webster.
You know.
He was the tooth man.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was
Don's out in the slaughterhouses, you guys are having fun.
Way more fun.
Did you ever think that maybe you want to get into that side of the business at that time instead of, you know, dealing with cow guts and stuff?
Yeah, I really liked the research situation.
Yeah.
That was, you know, but I also really liked the freedom of being outdoors and kind of, you know, working your own schedule and
Yeah.
everything. But
Yeah.
it's the research that I still really like about the business, is that there's always going to be new chemistries, and there's always going to be new materials to try, and just to give all those a try, and you know, 98% fail, but once in a while get something good. That's what I like about that part of the
That's
business.
right, that's right.
one thing about John Cadott, we were talking about John, that I recall quite well. One is that as a research institute, our only product was a report. That's all we had of the product. And the report had to be good, because we competed with a lot of people, as you know. John was our hero in the laboratory, but not necessarily in his reports. He didn't organize too well, and I always redid his reports. And I don't think he liked me for that particularly, but it was the only way. In fact, I was told by OSW that our reports were some of the best. I always made them as though they were, you know, optimistic, because we were optimistic about what it was. It was honest. So the report situation was probably a problem that
He didn't
I
like
had.
doing it. That was not developing. That was not
That's right.
coming up with it. He did not. He hated that stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I'd like to say that one thing is that, Lee, you really helped me in my career with writing.
Oh.
You mentored
Thank
me
you.
in my writing, which I took on to my next job in my next company. And it's amazing how these very smart, intelligent people, engineers, are really good, but they don't know how to write. And I had a lot of them in my group that I had to rewrite, just like you had to rewrite my reports.
I've noticed over the years they're getting worse.
They are.
But you had an English major there, you see?
Yeah.
He could have written all the reports.
That's true.
That's why that was amazing.
Oh, that's good. That's good. So you left in
74.
74,
Right.
and you stayed there and shut the doors,
I locked the door.
and you
And I
went
left
off to
in-
Medtronics
Yeah, in December of 75.
in
Yeah.
December of 75. So North Star closed its doors when?
1981. It
1981.
was actually MRI at the time, Midwest Research Institute, bought it, and Film Tech formed in 77, I believe, kind of 76, 77. They formed and went off on their own, and then MRI at the time stayed here in Minneapolis until 1981, and I locked the doors and turned over the key then. And then I came back in 1985 late. And just to see from what we did when these guys were there to what I walked into at the time was like, it was a revelation, right? All of a sudden they were casting it 40 inches wide, and they were rolling it up on huge 3,500 square foot rolls and all this, and wow, this is like totally different from the tube man casting little tubes like this to the flat cells where we're looking at it and we can't get the flux to come up, but the rejection is awesome, and we'd celebrate big time if we had any major breakthrough, and then we went downtown. But
But between the time that Gene and Roy and left and
Yep.
started Film Tech and the time that Midwest closed the doors here,
Yep.
did you do any other membrane research?
No.
No? So that was it?
No, it kind of fell off into the hinterland, and
Yeah,
nothing
that's
much more was done. Well, all the experts were gone,
Yeah, that's right.
and we didn't have anybody to follow up. I mean, Paulette, Clint Kopp, all these guys, Mike McGregor, they had all gone, so there was no one to really carry the torch on. So it kind of faded off into oblivion, and there were enough other things that were going on, I think, other places, so that we weren't getting the contracts anymore.
So when you left and went to Film Tech in what year?
I went to Film Tech in 1979.
So they'd been in business 2 years,
Yeah.
pretty much. And what did you find when you got there?
Wow.
Did you have a plywood casting machine?
They did, yeah.
Yeah.
It was a plywood pretty much. Ralph
Yeah.
took care of building that, and the casting the polysulfone before that I think was even more archaic. But yeah, it was really from that time until now. I guess it does seem like it's been 35 years, but you try to think about the change over that period of time, and it happens so gradually when you're part of it. But when I look back at it to see, I can't imagine John Cadoc carrying around a laptop, and now you couldn't even begin to work without that.
Right.
So that when the personal computers became part of the researchers' tools, that just really opened up a lot of, room to add more variables to experiments and to make bigger
So
and bigger.
when you started casting, when they started casting membrane at Film Tech, it didn't start as 40-inch castings.
No.
No.
They have a little time. One of the funniest things I can remember, we had a guy, Les Banner, you probably remember, brilliant engineer. Roy wanted a 40-inch element. We needed a 40-inch element, and we cast 12-inch membrane. So Les designed a machine where we would have 4 rolls of membrane on different spindles, and then feed it through some razor blades that were mounted, and then it would split the membranes so they came up and met each other, and then we put a piece of tape on. So we taped all those rolls of membrane together to make a 40-inch wide. But then when we manufactured that or made it into elements, we had to put glue on every one of those seams So the things came out looking like a dinosaur bone, just, funny looking things. But I guess that it was really interesting to go through that. But one of the unfortunate things about the whole process was these exposed razor blades. And pretty much every day I could hear Les Banner swearing on his way to the bathroom, leaving a trail of blobs of blood down. He probably cut his finger every other day, but made it through it, and we started making 40-inch membranes like that. And
Well, Roy used to, and it's like Ian said, when he first met Roy would go to Florida, put a 25-14 in his pocket, seawater, and go down and go to Stuart McClellan and everybody and go, look what I got. Can you build something that will produce water with this? And that's kind of how the evolution started. And we did. We had a great relationship with Sanibel.
Yeah.
And that's where we developed a lot of the stuff. And I spent hours and days and weeks there at Sanibel as we were developing things in the mid-'80s. But just to come back to film tech a little bit, in that, we finally could cast membrane 40 inches wide, but then we had to manually roll. And so when I first came back, I said, I want to learn, every job that's here. So I went out on the floor and started manually rolling the glue gun. And, so then finally we got an educated idea to come up with, maybe we can automated a slight glue line. So we got part of that going. Then from there, we went into another version, and from there we went to Amex 1 and 2 back in the 90s or early 90s, where all of a sudden we could produce an element in like 15 to 20 minutes, and it was like a revelation. Now we can go into the municipal market in big shipments, and those two archaic pieces of equipment started generating what. And if anybody was to take a tour and you look at this now compared to what we started with, is amazing.
Yeah.
Is amazing.
It's amazing. It's amazing. Yeah, I have to tell you a funny story. When I left Sanibel in 1979, I went to work for Hydronautics. And one day I was talking to Jim Bartlett. He'd come over to the membrane side of the business, because he also made jack-up platforms for the oil business, blow-off preventers, that kind of stuff. And I said, there's a company in Minnesota called Filmtech, and I think they've been, we were trying to develop a thin film composite at Hydronautics at the time and having no luck whatsoever. At least I didn't think so. They all said, yeah, we're doing great, but it wasn't that great. So I said, you really should think about buying them. And he said, I said, they'll never make it.
Well, yeah, I remember, and I remember when they started, and I mean, they came and talked to us. Said, we're starting up a company. Do you? Well, I don't know. Here I am. I'm thinking about getting married. And do I really want to go work in a brand new company? And are they going to make it? And I stayed back. Now I wish I would have gone. I wish I'd have, but still going away and coming back and seeing the evolution was amazing, because it was kind of like when I got there just as Dow was really starting to take over. So Roy was still there, and but they were kind of passing the baton, and Terry Marsh was the first Dow guy, I think, that came in to start, and it was like a whole different aspect of somebody from Dow R&D, and he went and tried to explain things to him, and we don't do things like that at Dow. So it was and that kind of really changed the whole deal. So I didn't see too much of the film tech stuff. I came in as it was all transitioning.
Yeah. But the same thing happened. Just before I left Hydronautics, Jim Bartlett sold it to Roman Haas.
Mm-hmm.
And we had some Roman Haas people come out to Santa Barbara, just kind of sit in. They had no clue
Right.
about the business at all.
Nope.
Absolutely none.
No, it's amazing. It's
Yeah.
amazing. And the products today are so much different.
Yeah. Well, we could probably go on for a while, but we need to wrap up and get ready for the next step, which is the film tech section of this interview. And so I'd like you to just summarize, if you would, given your experiences at North Star and elsewhere. Would you do it again if you had to, or would you go and make automobiles somewhere?
I'd do it again.
You would?
Oh, yeah, I love North Star. And I had another opportunity, and it was a very good one that I thought, so I took it. But the people, the technology, the successes we were having, it was fun. It was fun.
Good,
It was a great company and good people.
good. Great.
Well, yeah, and then to watch the evolution, I mean, to start with it and then to go away and then to come back and see it nowadays, it's completely, I mean, it amazes me how much water you can produce out of a membrane and the quality of the water that comes out. And it's an ugly, it's an ugly product. And that's the problem, you know, you're selling an ugly product that is actually really benefits the entire world. So you got to look at it as we were pioneers in an evolution of a product to actually, make the world better.
Yeah.
So
I'd do it when I first started in the business 40-odd years ago, it always struck me as a very elegant technology. It's a one-step way of treating water. If you look at conventional water treatment,
Right.
That was kind of from the 1800s. This
Well-
was 21st century technology.
And to take the components that we took with, the Trico, take it out of the collar stays and use that as a permeate carrier, and to take, the feed spacer coming from, turkey wrap and stuff, to
Right.
wrap dead turkeys in, and then to try to tell them that you had to have a spec to meet this requirement was amazing. So the components and the way this was all developed is amazing.
Yeah. Yeah. Ken?
Yes, I think it was a very worthwhile experience for me to start out at North Star. It was not only for my own professional development, but also for the feeling, that you were doing meaningful research, that eventually, this is really going to be needed. And one of the things that I didn't mention before, about 15 years ago, I went to visit my nephew. He was running a cheese factory down near Denver, in I think Fort Collins or one of the towns in Denver, and he had RO systems that were set up and running too. And I don't. But he showed me how they were treating the waste and the recycling, the whey and all that, and they were, and that was technology. That was a dream in the early 70s, and here it is implemented and being used and for the benefit of mankind, and it was just great. It was just a great feeling. So.
Yeah, it's had, I mean, membrane technology is used everywhere. I went to a maple syrup facility up in New Hampshire a few years ago.
Yeah.
And they had, in fact, they were FilmTech membranes. They
Yeah.
were concentrating maple syrup.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
amazing.
Yeah, it
Don,
was a good feeling.
you left and went to work for FilmTech, so you must have really enjoyed the
I did.
membrane industry.
It was. I'm really glad and thankful that I got to do it and that they called, and it's been a wonderful experience. And I think now seeing that it's just going to continue to grow, seeing it move into third world nations and
Right.
communities where they're eliminating disease, and it's really going to help a lot in the
Good,
future.
good.
Yep.
Well, I can't thank you guys enough for coming and joining us here today. And Lee, you made an extra special trip up here with your rotator. I told you, guys your age shouldn't be throwing fastballs.
Yeah, well,
I always thought that was a baseball
I
industry.
keep missing the steps.
So that concludes our this version of Chats with the Pioneers, and thank you all for coming, and it's been enjoyable. Thanks very much.